Hi everyone, I'm Andy Wike.
And I'm Josh Burgess.
We're back at it again today for another special episode of All Pipes Considered. Josh, thank you for joining us.
Yep, thanks for having me.
So today we're going to be talking about Peterson St Patrick's Day 2025 pipes. So St. Patrick's Day is the longest running limited edition series at Peterson.
Right.
It's very important to the marque for a number of reasons. I mean, St. Patrick's Day is probably the most iconic Irish holiday that there is. I'm sure being a history buff, you might find a couple other,
Couple of other important things happen there, right?
But St. Patrick's Day is known around the world as a very Irish holiday, and for many decades now, Peterson has released a limited edition series celebrating that. And this year's is particularly special because it marks the 160th anniversary of Kapp Peterson pipes. So this isn't the anniversary pipe, so to speak, but it is the anniversary edition of the St. Patrick's Day line. And so to speak more to that, we've got Glen Whelan, who's gladly agreed to answer some questions for us. Josh and I aren't Irish as much as we. Yeah, exactly. So as much as we might want to be, but yeah. So we're going to kick it over to Glen to speak more to the 160 years and what St. Patrick's Day means for Peterson.
The St. Patrick's Day series for me is one that gives us an opportunity each year to celebrate Ireland and its heritage. We've celebrated this many ways in the past, be it a green stain system, a tricoloured ring accent, and even an emerald green stem. This is not just a celebration of Peterson, but a celebration of Ireland. This year is an incredible moment in Peterson's history. 160 years is an incredible achievement for any industry, but for that industry to be pipe making is truly extraordinary. This is a testament to the craftsmen who've gone before us and helped build the legacy that we are privileged to help continue. The St. Patrick's Day series this year is as traditional as it can get. Peterson lip, vulcanite stems, and sterling silver bands.
Yeah, so this year's series is far more traditional than we've seen in some of the previous years where we've been experimenting with color palettes and different things. If you'll remember, 2024 St. Patrick's Day, it had the green acrylic military mount, which was super cool. But this year, I think just to celebrate the 160 years and all that tradition and legacy, we have gone for a more traditional sort of presentation. Josh, can you speak to that and what's available pipe-wise and talk about the series itself for a minute?
Sure, and as Glenn said, thinking about the importance of this series for the factory and the fact that it was 160 years meant that this one was particularly special to us. And so we really wanted to celebrate all of the things that makes a Peterson pipe a Peterson pipe. Mm-hmm. And so you're naturally thinking about the Peterson lip, which is featured on the series this year. You're thinking about vulcanite. Mm-hmm. So this year's pipe features a vulcanite P-lip stem. We also showcased Peterson silverwork and did a variety of finishes that I think showcase the best of classic Peterson. So we have rusticated finish in the sort of black and red kind of two-tone. We have the smooth finish, which is the sort of terracotta clay-colored stain, which I think looks particularly nice, and then the heritage, and then the black sandblast. Mm-hmm. So we offered 4 finishes this year, all featuring that classic silver work, all featuring the black vulcanite stem.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask a little bit about how you all come up with these ideas. I mean, I think the presentation this year is going to inspire a lot of folks who are classic Peterson fans, but I think Glen might be able to answer this a little bit better.
Yeah,
so we might kick it back over to him.
Let's kick that over to Glen.
So Glen, if you could tell us a little bit about how we come up with new series, and particularly what the R&D was like for this year's St. Patrick's Day pipes.
We normally start planning for a series about a year out. I've said this before in the past, usually the trigger for us to start thinking about a release is when the previous year's version is out to the customers. So for instance, this year, St. Patrick's Day, which some customers probably have in their hands already, we're already thinking about next year's release. That idea for a release usually stems from a table of Josh, Sykes and I in Dublin or wherever we may be at a time, having a much more formal meeting, and then someone will kind of lay out an idea in front of us where they say, oh, I have this great idea for a series. We have a concept then. Once we have the concept, we bring it to Jonathan, Giacomo, and this year in particular it was to Jason because of the silver work that's involved. If they don't think there's any issues, then we get a test batch into production.
That's perfect, Glenn. Thank you. On the silver itself, Josh, you mentioned this as well, that this year's has sterling silver. I believe it's only the second St. Patrick's Day edition
that's right.
to actually feature silver. But not only, is Jason's work evident here, and the actual silver bands are quite nice, but this year actually features a brand new stamp on the silver, and it is sort of this shamrock that's sort of rendered in Celtic knotwork,
Right.
Which I think is really cool. I think Peterson's done shamrocks in the past, and shamrocks are very much associated with Ireland and St. Patrick's Day in particular. But I think adding the sort of Celtic spin, the Celtic knotwork, that traditional sort of line work there, I think is a really cool touch.
It's an elevated take on the shamrock.
But I imagine that wasn't without its challenges. Maybe we can kick it back over to Glenn to talk about that for a second. Glenn, what was the biggest challenge of this year's? Was it the knotwork? Was it the shaping itself? Speak to that for a second.
I think one of the main challenges we faced was very early on in the production of these pipes, and that was coming up with a design for a shamrock for the band that looks unique. We wanted to take the shamrock to the next level, so the design guys came up with a truly outstanding design that incorporates Celtic nuts within a shamrock. More broadly speaking, pipe making is not easy. It presents many challenges along the way, but we have many skilled craftsmen working with us that are able to navigate through these problems with consummate ease.
That's super interesting. Fascinating, Glenn. Thank you. Looking at this, there's a lot of things that catch my eye. There's a lot of things that resonate with me personally, as a Pete geek, as Mark Irwin says. I think the sort of classic variety of finishes, we haven't touched on this yet, but it's the entire classic line essentially. So a lot of variety of shapes to choose from. I love that we're using vulcanite and P-lip stems. What is your personal favorite aspect of this year's?
I think it probably would come back to that range of shapes where it's offered, and there's some favorites that are sitting right here on our stand.
Mm-hmm.
The 999 was one of those shapes as a new pipe smoker many years ago. It was one of the Peterson shapes that just sort of jumped out at me and drew me in. Really classic Peterson shaping. I'm also quite a fan of the 701 that is here. I think it's sort of a perfect pocket pipe. It's a great companion pipe. But I think my favorite thing about the series this year is just the variety of shapes, and I think there'll be something here for every Peterson pipe smoker.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Josh. I think that's spot on. If you're a Peterson collector, you're going to find your favorite shape in this year's edition. I'm also interested to see what Glenn's favorite part of this was. So, Glenn, can you tell us what is your favorite aspect of this year's edition or release?
I think my favorite part of this release is just how traditional the pipe is. It's a vulcanite stem, Peterson lip with silver bands. It's what Peterson is all about for me, just traditional aesthetic. I think the other key piece for me that makes this even more special is the variety of shapes and finishes it's available in. Peterson is the everyday pipe, and I think we have something in here that fits the bill for every day for the pipe smoker.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that, Glenn. And again, Josh, thank you for being here and talking about these array of new pipes for St. Patrick's Day. I'm very much excited to see how these do. I think a lot of folks out there who are avid Peterson fans, even folks who really appreciate the classic series, want something a little more elevated. I think this year's edition, more than anything else, is timeless. And I think that's a really nice homage to 160 years of Kapp Peterson.
Thank you.
So Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and for speaking about these pipes for a little bit. And again, thank you to Glen over in Ireland for helping us out with some of the backstories. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed them. Drop us a line in the comments section to let us know which one is your favorite from this year's edition. And we'll catch you again next time on All Pipes Considered.